Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening, and welcome to our second JTalk titled Shifting Fields of Force, the Growing Iranian Presence and Its Impact on Prospects for Regional Peace. My name is Ariel, and I'm JspaceCanada's Social Justice Intern. Hopefully everything's running smoothly on the technical side this week, so let us know in the comments that you're there and that you're with us. I'm just going to remind everyone how tonight will work. Just like last week, our speaker will have the floor for the first 20 minutes. And during this time, any of you are encouraged to comment in the comment section down below where you can give your opinions and ask questions for the presenter. And after the presentation, we'll give the speaker a chance to answer those questions and respond to your comments. So I'd now like to introduce tonight's speaker, Paul Michaels. Paul is the Director of Research and Media Relations for CJA, acting as a liaison between the Organized Jewish Communities of Canada and the media on Canada-Israel Matters and Jewish Affairs in Canada. He's been a frequent visitor to Israel and has expertise on Middle East issues. And he also travels to Jewish communities across Canada to engage with them on a full range of issues, both domestic and Israel-related. Over many years of interacting with journalists, foreign correspondents, and their editors and producers, Paul acquired a detailed appreciation for the nature and functioning of the media in Canada and abroad. He speaks frequently on research and media-related issues and writes a monthly column for the CJN. Paul was raised and educated in Toronto, and he earned his MA in philosophy and was a Canada Council Fellow. Paul is on the JSpace Advisory Committee, and I'm happy to introduce him to you all.
Good evening. First, I want to thank Karen for inviting me to participate in JTalks. I want to thank Ariel and David Groskind for doing technical help on this. Shifting Fields of Force is a title taken from the literary culture critic George Steiner's book on the famous 1972 Fischer-Spassky World Chess Championship match in Reykjavik. This is appropriate imagery for this evening's subject, since, like the immense complications and combinations of possible chess moves given any position, the numerous players in the Middle East create tremendous complications, especially with shifting alliances and uncertainties, even if what we're observing at the moment overall is a hostile divide between non-Arab Shia Iran and its proxies on the one hand, and Sunni Arab states led by Saudi Arabia and other Gulf states, Egypt along with Jordan, and all working mostly behind the scenes with Israel on the other. Thrown into this mix, of course, are major Russian, U.S., Turkish, and Kurdish interests and maneuvers, and yes, more shifting alliances along the way. Now, I must admit that in the short time that I have, I can barely scratch the surface, and so must omit far more than I can include, but enough, I trust, to get this evening's discussion underway. And I also trust that during the Q&A, we'll be able to deal with some of the important components that I must omit in the next 20 minutes. Let's start with just a quick recap. In the aftermath of the failed Arab Spring and the violent chaos that ensued from Libya to Yemen, approximately 2010 to 2013, with the exception of Syria, whose torment may finally conclude only this year or next, but even that's not certain, Iran has been consolidating its expanding regional ambitions, otherwise called aggression, stretching all the way from Yemen in the east and the Gulf to the Mediterranean to Lebanon in the west. A field of force often referred to as Iran's Shia Crescent, enabled by what turned out to be George Bush Jr.'s disastrous decision to invade Iraq in 2003, overthrowing the Sunni leadership of the brutal dictator Saddam Hussein, but leaving Iraq one of two Shia majority Arab states, the other being Bahrain, eventually in the hands of Shia-dominant leadership that has not only been favorable to Iran, but which, as many authorities argue, has come under Iran's influence and partial control. But with Iran's growing presence in Syria and its determination to entrench itself there, mainly in the western quarter stretching from the south to the north, and Israel's determination that it will not allow Iran to establish, quote, permanent military bases in the country, the situation is increasingly volatile. It's made even more volatile and tricky by Russia's efforts to accommodate both Iran and Israel. Russia, which has advanced S-300 anti-aircraft missiles in Syria, will allow Israeli jets to attack Iranian bases, and has even reportedly promised Israel that it will force Iran to move back 85 kilometers from Israel's northern border in the Golan Heights. I've exceeded my time limit, but before I conclude, I've not addressed the important developments involving Iran, including its support of Hamas and Islamic Jihad in Gaza, nor how any of this affects the prospects for or against peace, though, as you can surmise, prospects for peace are not encouraging by what I've outlined above, with the possible exception of implications from the developing strategic alliance between Sunni Arab states fearful of Iran and Israel. But now I'll leave it up to...
All right. If you have a question for Paul, feel free to ask in the comment section below, and we can start with some questions that we have here. Did you want
David, you have...
Paul, given the fact that the Gulf states and Israel now have a common enemy, Iran, which is increasing a threat to all of them, is it easy to say that they will, Israel and its traditional enemies in the Gulf are going to become closer together and form a common front against Iran?
Well, actually, that's what a lot of analysts are saying, and that's what's actually happening. I mean, most of these relationships are developing in a covert manner. They're not overt. They're not open about it because they would incur too much wrath from internally. But the Gulf states, led foremost by Saudi Arabia and Bahrain and the UAE, are absolutely looking to Israel, but primarily to Israel to lead the force against Iran. And what is happening, and what I was trying to explain in the brief presentation, is that Israel's repeated attacks on Iranian installations, missile sites, radar sites, airfields, and all the rest, which have met virtually no retaliation from Iran, except for that effort to launch 20 rockets in the Golan, indicates that Iran knows that it can't really stand up to Israel, can't take on Israel. Israel is the only force in the region that is really capable of dealing with Iran directly. The Gulf states you mentioned earlier this evening have tremendous wealth, and they acquire a huge amount, tens of billions of dollars of American weapons, but they really don't have the capacity to use them effectively. If you just look at what Saudi Arabia is doing in Yemen and going after the Iranian-backed Houthi rebels, with all of the power they have and with coordination with the United States, who are supplying logistics help, they're unable to defeat the Houthi rebels that are backed up by Iran. And what's actually happening is Iran is supplying them with missiles, which the Houthi rebels are firing into Saudi Arabia to be knocked down by U.S.-supplied Patriot missiles when they can. But what's really disconcerting is the limited capacity that Saudi Arabia has, even though it buys $100 billion worth of armaments, to be able to take on the Houthi rebels and achieve some victory with them. Other Gulf states have not shown any capacity, have not been involved directly, as far as I know, in in military operations. Again, they're looking to Israel to achieve that.
So at your conclusion, you mentioned that you didn't have enough time to really examine how the Sunni Arab states might help promote regional peace, and I assume Israeli-Palestinian peace. So what are those prospects?
Well, it's very, very complicated. First of all, let's look more optimistically. I tend to be very pessimistic on the outlook of Middle East affairs. The fact that so many Sunni Arab states, and now we're talking not just about the Gulf Arab states, we're talking about Egypt, that's looking to Israel to help defend itself against ISIS and other jihadist elements in the Sinai Peninsula. The security and cooperation there is tremendous. Israel has, of course, peace agreement with Egypt in 1979, has a peace agreement with Jordan from 1994, and they have very strong relationships. They don't have any peace agreements with any other Arab state, but now Saudi Arabia and the other Gulf states are looking to Israel, and they're working in cooperation with Israel, and that may lead, some believe, to striking a peace agreement down the road. But many of them also say that they can't do it until the Israelis and Palestinians come to an agreement themselves. The prospect of that happening, unfortunately, are remote. Israel, if you go back to Camp David in 2000 and the Annapolis talks in 2008, had offered the Palestinians a viable Palestinian state, but those offers were rejected. It has unfortunate consequences to this day. Egypt is involved in brokering ties between Hamas and Fatah in Gaza, but those ties have not been bound in any way. There's ongoing friction between Hamas and Fatah. And when through Egyptian mediation, Hamas was talking about and agreed to some type of limited truce with Israel. It was the PA under Abbas that acted as a counterforce, putting roadblocks in the way to an agreement. So it's tremendously complicated. The other thing I should mention is that in 2002, Saudi Arabia came up with the Arab Peace Initiative. It was endorsed in Lebanon that year. But Israel became very suspicious when countries like Libya and Syria decided to go along with it, because one component of the Arab Peace Initiative deals with the Palestinian refugees.
We're just going to end off with one last question from one of the viewers. So the question is, what is the advantage of Trump breaking the Iran deal?
What is the advantage?
Yeah.
This is really an area of great uncertainty. Trump, of course, said, I don't know if he's ever read the deal, that it's the worst deal imaginable. A lot of Israelis who are very suspicious of the deal, who believe that the IRGC that I described before has only been involved in cheating and would find other ways of cheating and putting Israel and the Gulf Arab states at risk and move ahead in developing nuclear weapons. The fact that, Netanyahu is very pleased that Trump broke the deal and has imposed the first round of sanctions, because there is no trust that Iran is going to ultimately comply with it. The danger is that if Iran kicks out the nuclear inspectors, it could move ahead to a nuclear device within a few months, whereas under the current JCPOA that was struck in July of 2015, it would take Iran at least a year if it decided to break the agreement and move ahead to a bomb. But in the meantime, the Europeans, under the leadership of Federica Mogherini, who's the Foreign Affairs Minister for the EU, has claimed that the EU has at its disposal a blocking arrangement, a blocking statute so that it doesn't have to comply. Nor does Russia or China or any of the other P5+1 members who signed the Iran nuclear deal with the secondary sanctions that the U.S. has reimposed now. The United States dismisses that. And if it comes to wanting to do business with Iran or wanting to do business with the United States is counting on the greater likelihood that the European countries that want to abide by the agreement, the JCPOA, will ultimately concede that their future, the better money lies with the United States. Now, Trump, as I mentioned earlier, has said that he'd be glad to meet with Rouhani, the Iranian president, and renegotiate a better agreement. Whether that comes about, that also remains to be seen. There's just too much uncertainty in this.
Thank you so much, Paul, for speaking us. Thanks to all the viewers who are joining and contributing to tonight's discussion. We'd love to hear your thoughts on tonight's J Talk and how we can improve. So feel free to send us a message, and be sure to join us next Tuesday for a talk given called Israeli and Diaspora Jews, Are We Moving Further Apart?, given by Rabbi Larry Englander. Again, thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you next week.